So Rich was right. Good parts of it are a little boring. But for the most part, it's a really good conference to go to. And we have a very good leader. Bishop Bob keeps things moving. And you can tell that this year, a little bit, that he had a little bit of a troubled soul this year. That the event in Orlando and some of the other events in the world have come to weigh on him because he's a very internal person, and he internalizes the events of the world and tries to bring them into relationship with what's going on in our conference and try to make sense of all this. And it was just kind of like today, that as I was getting prepared for this message, I kept wanting to preach on the Good Samaritan today. That was my intent. That's not what's going to happen. It just, God speaks to you and says no, and then so you start writing and you start looking, researching, getting commentaries out on the Good Samaritan thing, and God says no. And so I thought, okay, I'll switch. I'll go to the other one. I'll go into the epistle reading today, the letter of Paul to the Colossians. And so I started working on that, and as I started writing, I started thinking about the idea of the way things used to be a little bit. Because I'm hearing all this week from a lot of different people that, things didn't used to be this way. That it just didn't, it seems like something fundamentally has changed within our society, and it's not good. It's didn't change for the better. So we're going to start off with Paul and the letter to the Colossians and see where this might go for us. But this is a letter that Paul wrote. Remember, that the mailbox and with the postal person? Wasn't that such a great thing? Yeah. Now when somebody says you've got mail, you don't run to your post office. In fact, for most of us, including myself, and me lately, I do this. Isn't that terrible? My mail is right here on my arm. Emails and messages and texts and alarms and buzzers and all that stuff that I've got it set for to do this and do that. It's right here. And when it goes off, if you see me do that, then somebody needs to kind of just bring me back to reality, because I'm trying to get trained so that when it does do what it does, I don't do this. Because I don't really want to look at it. But that's the way things are. You've got mail. We used to take the time to actually go get a piece of paper and a pen and find an envelope and a stamp and think about the person that you're writing to in your own mind, and that maybe just sent you a birthday card or greeted you with a letter some time ago that you owe them a letter back. And we talked, we conversed. And we hoped and prayed that the letter got there, because 9 times out of 10, the post office, no, I'm not going to say that. I don't know if you have postal people in here. So. Not people who go postal, just postal people. I don't quit digging that hole. But it was different. It was so much very different than it was. Paul's writing this letter. Paul's never been to the church and to the town at Colossae. He's never been there. But he wants the people to know that he knows about them. So he's writing them this letter from wherever it is. And he may be in prison as he's writing this letter. And he tells them that he has heard of them. I know you. I know you. And I've got word about all the good stuff that you're doing. I know that you have spent a great deal of time thinking about what you're doing. Your church is growing, it's doing great things, and for that reason, I pray for you all the time. I think about you, you're doing great work, keep it up. And then he goes on to say, because I've heard this from Epaphras, and Epaphras was a friend of mine, so he ties himself to the person who does know about the church. And he starts to talk about the things that make them good. The things that they're doing that make them good. He says you're rooted. And he starts to talk about the ways that they're rooted. You're rooted like a seed. Epaphras planted this seed, and it's got deep roots right now, and it's rooted in hope. It's rooted in hope. In other letters, he says that most of the time that your faith and your fruits of the Spirit and your love that you show and everything, the other virtues that you have are rooted in love. But in this letter, he says it's rooted in hope. And your faith and your love for the community bear fruit out of that. And so when we look at the deep seeds and the deep roots and this agrarian type analogy that he uses, this tree, he says, I know all about you, and I know how deep your roots go, and I know that you're doing good work. Sounds kind of like the letter that John writes from in Revelations, doesn't it? Just a little bit to the saints in the seven churches, and he starts telling them about them. To the saints in Laodicea, I know about you. You're doing great work. I've heard about you. Because Paul's going to get to the next thing that follows. But I got this one thing against you. That comes in chapter 2. Paul is understanding that there's, out of their great work, they've got a sickness in their society that's causing them to reap the full benefits of the fruits of the Spirit that's grounded in the hope. And the hope is their eternity, the resurrection, Christ. You picked it up, you know about it, you got it, you understand it. But something's going on within you that you're not exactly willing to share the way that it needs to be shared. And part of the problem was the society, the culture they lived in. The problem is that the church does exist within a city, that exists within a nation, that exists within an area, and the area is infected with the idea of mysticism and Gnosticism. So Paul knows about these things, and what he's saying is you need to put that stuff aside because somebody is steering you wrong. Somebody is telling you things, and your culture that you're surrounded with is starting to influence you more than what Epaphras did. You're getting away from what you know to be true, and your roots are starting to die a little bit. And the tree's not looking, your faith is not as strong as it used to be. The fruit that you were bearing, the faith and the love that you were showing for all people and all considerations, now it's not doing so good. Paul is trying to tell them that their spirituality that you think, the Gnosticism was the brain, the knowing, that you don't have to worry about the body doesn't mean anything anyway, and besides that, you could do whatever you want to with it, and so they would find many different ways to pervert that and to do that, because it didn't much matter anyway. And the spiritual side of it, the Jewish mysticism, said that they would, if you knew the right people, knew the right magic words, and knew the right ways and formulas and all this kind of stuff, you could attain a higher level of spirituality. And Paul will later tell them the fullness of God is contained in Christ. You don't need another spirituality. You need to let go of that. But what he's saying is that there's a problem in your society that's pervasive. There's a problem in your culture that's wrong. There's a problem where you live, and instead of divorcing yourself from it, you bought into it. And we have to get away from that. In the events of this past week, it caused me to go look at some different things. Do you know that we managed to kill each other 87 times a day? Did you know that in the United States? 87 times a day that somebody is killed in the United States for whatever reason. I don't know how what constitutes a kill, but knowing what I know about Chicago, Detroit, San Francisco, LA, parts of St. Louis, some of the other places, I would say that may even be conservative. That right now, that your chances of survival are better if you go to Afghanistan as a soldier than they are if you live in Chicago. Think about that. Think about that violence. And these are our cities. These are places that we're supposed to feel safe. And so we think about all the stuff that this could possibly mean that we're in danger even in our own country, even in our own city, even in our own place here. If Paul was to write a letter to us today, what would Paul say about us? What would Paul say to us? You're doing great work, you got real high energy, everything is fine, don't change a thing. Or is there something that Paul would recognize if he wrote to the church in St. Louis, if he wrote to the church in Detroit, Chicago, LA? And we're not exempt here. We live in a real nice, clean community, but there are problems here too. But we're starting to change. Something is, I'm talking to more people this morning that have this countenance on their face that says that something happened and they don't like it. Remember, we talked about this second naivete that happens, an event that's earth-shaking, that shatters our confidence in what we know, that changes the way that we fundamentally believe, and eventually it impacts us and we process it, we make sense of it, and then all of a sudden it's like the gun that goes off in the woods. It makes such a loud noise and everything stops and there's total silence, and within a few seconds, then the noise starts to pick up and everybody, within a minute, we're right back where we was before. Only for us, we've indexed forward a little bit. We won't ever be the same. We won't ever be the same. We're fundamentally changed. We look at the violence that we are in today and we say to ourselves, is there any light at the end of the darkness? And Paul said, yes, that God, through Christ, has moved us. In Christ, the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. You don't need to look any further. And he has moved us out of the darkness into the light, into a process of knowing. And the message that Paul says to the Colossians is the same one that we could say this morning. That as we look at whether or not that we can change back to this early days when postmen picked up letters, or this time when we didn't hate each other and kill each other for no particular reason, and say that yes, transformation was possible. If we tried to say that, I wanted to make this more of a dialogue this morning, but it's kind of not lending itself that way. But if we thought about this idea of conferencing within ourselves, the idea of a holy huddle that Rich was talking about, where we sit around a table and we just open up ideas and talk about what would it take for us to change the culture of violence. How would we go about doing it? How would we do it? Because we're bought into this. Violence is a way of life for us. We love it. Baseball used to be the national pastime. Baseball wasn't violent enough, so football is now. And we love it, even though we know that it's going to destroy your brain, it's going to wreck, and just like boxing. But we got mayhem and mesquite coming up here in a little bit, so that's good. We like to see other people go do that. Go beat these brains out. And we'll even, that if you charge admission, we'll pay to see it. The Romans used to crucify Christians in the Colosseum and tear them apart with lions, and people couldn't wait to get in there to see that. Cain and Abel, first thing that happens when one of them sacrifices accepted and the other one's not, do we work it out? Do we talk about it? Do we see what you did right or you did wrong? No. Take a rock to his head. Violence is something that is easy for us. Think of road rage. Think of that just for a second. That it's worth killing somebody over the fact that you were delayed 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. Somebody pulled out in front of you. Somebody got in your way. Somebody impeded your progress. Somebody cut you off. Think about the ways that we inflict harm on other people and how easy it is for us to do that. And it starts when we're young. And we learn it, and we perfect it, and we get good at it. And by the time that we get to our age, we enjoy watching. Look at what we watch on TV. How is it that somebody, and these are picked from the news, and these are the things that just eat my heart out. Somebody can think that while they're in college, it's a good idea to call a girlfriend up and give her a drug call his buddies on the football team to come and have their way with him, with her, and video it at the same time. How have we reached a society where that somehow makes sense to anybody? I don't get it. But that's not the question. The question is, how do we change? How do we get back to a civil society where we have moved out of the darkness into the light? God is our spiritual guide. Jesus in Christ, God in Christ is the one the perfecter of our faith, the one that takes us to where we need to go. And the first thing that I thought about was 2 Chronicles 7:14. And I know that it doesn't apply to us right here, right now. It was Solomon talking about building the temple and dedicating the dedication of the temple. This gets me a little worked up. Transformation is possible. The Apostle Paul said, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We have to change our mind. We'll never change the culture until you get it within yourself that you're part of the problem. If we don't think that it's all about, that something's fundamentally wrong with us, then it's always your fault. Until we talk about it and start changing ourselves where it's no longer acceptable for violence and bullying and the things that we share, like, post, forward, that are filled with hate speech, they're not acceptable. Don't send me that. I don't want it. 2 Chronicles, we need to pray this each day. If my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. Now Solomon was talking about something that was a little bit differently. God has talked about a blight on the land, locusts in the fields, no harvest, dry up the water. And God said, but that if you will just turn towards me and meet me and work with me, pray. Sometimes that we don't take that seriously enough. That we don't get to that point of where we start praying for the needs of ourselves and our country, the people that we're in relationships with. We think somehow that it's all about us rather than about them. Until we start thinking about this collectively, my people, if my people will turn and humble themselves. We got too much pride to do anything like that, though, right? Pride won't let us do that. Pride won't let me say I'm wrong. My thought process is wrong. Pride says, you've got a problem. Not I've got a problem. Not we've got a problem. We've got to address this. We've got to look at what's happened this week in Dallas, Minneapolis, in Louisiana, Atlanta. We've named off the biggest part of the cities. We can't continue this way. We have to find a way that where violence is no longer acceptable, and it begins with you. It begins with me. And it's going to take a cultural change. Paul recognized this. Paul recognized it in his letter. You're doing great things, and it's easy to get caught up in that everything is just hunky-dory, that everything's fine. Paul says, but I got this one thing against you. You're bought into a program that won't sustain itself. And it's a trajectory that we're headed right now. We won't have to worry about too much because we're going to end up just doing away with ourselves. We watched a building down in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, that the one historic building that they imploded it. Yeah, took away enough of the support system and it falls in on itself. Put that idea in your brain. Nobody has to do anything from the outside. The weakness is on the inside. God speaks to us today. God speaks to us through each one of us in our conversations. And I think that we really, really, really need to sit down as a church, and Rich will attest to this. When we go down to and watch how some of the growing churches are working, they have defined their culture. They know what the culture of the church is. And so we're going to start asking questions in different ways about what the culture of our church is. And when we get it to where we know what this church stands for and what it will accept and what it won't accept, then that's the message that we're going to take. We're going to ask for God's guidance as we do this. If my people will turn towards me and pray and get rid of their silly pride and listen to me, I'll heal their land. Let's pray. God, we come to you right now in this time, knowing that we are prideful people who just do not want to change and want to keep everything just the way that it is because our lives are so good. But we know that we've got a fundamental problem in our country and in this world, and that we are no longer islands and isolated, that we're a global community. We know more about what's happening across the ocean than we do in our sister city next door. God, we need your blessing upon us. We need you to bless us, change our culture away from where we're headed. The church at Colossae was grounded in hope, and the fruit that they were bearing was increased faith and increased love. That's what we want for our church here this morning. We ask your blessing upon us.